Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm your co-host, Andrew Elizaga, here with Dubside.
And you're listening to the Dubcast with Dubside.
So Dubside and I have a big announcement to make regarding Dubside's summer plans.
Yes, my summer plans are, well, they haven't come together quite like I wanted them to. A lot of my contacts in Scandinavia, things aren't quite happening, and some of my events in the U.S. are a little slower than normal. But I still want to go to Greenland. And Andrew and I have come up with a plan for me to get to Greenland.
Yep.
And that involves asking all of you listeners to the Dubcast with Dubside and anybody else in the general public to contribute to my airfare to get to Greenland. And to do that, we've set up a GoFundMe site, right?
Yep. Now, people who started listening to the Dubcast from the very beginning might remember that we actually started soliciting donations through Patreon. Well, we never got many donations through Patreon, which I can understand because it requires you to subscribe.
So that's like a commitment that you're going to be paying on a regular basis?
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that's a big ask.
Yeah. But GoFundMe is a one-time deal. So if you've enjoyed this Dubcast, if you've enjoyed the stories and the awesome performances by Dubside and the fascinating interviews and found some value in this material that we have put together the last couple of years, now is your chance to show that appreciation by making a donation to Dubside's GoFundMe. And you're not only helping to cover travel expenses, Dubsides are really our kayaking ambassador to Greenland. And he represents the intense interests that we Americans have in the Greenlandic kayaking culture. And they're always happy to see him there participating. And after 3 long years, it's time he returned.
Yeah. Well, no, I haven't been to Greenland since, was it 2018, I think? It's been like 5 years.
It's been a while. So yeah.
I bet there are probably kids there who, when I see them, I'll think their younger brother is them, you know?
So your generosity will come back several-fold in the stories and insights that he'll bring back with him to be shared on this podcast.
Yes, I'll be doing interviews and things, and whenever possible. So, yes, help me out.
All right, I'll put the link in the show notes. And thank you all very much. So without further ado, here is episode number 53, which I'm sure you'll all find interesting, Rolling Reexamined.
Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. This is Dubcast number 53. Rolling Reexamined. I know I've done some episodes that strayed pretty far from the subject of kayaking, and I did hear one request to get back to some of the nuts and bolts of the podcast here. So I'm going to look at the basic idea of rolling. We'll talk about forward-ending rolls and maybe take a new view of it by way of a very old view of it. Music this week originally done by a woman named Nive Nielsen. Well, I first learned to roll. It's been almost 25 years now. And I did my first rolling video, I think that was 18 years ago. And I have written articles about rolling. I've done subsequent videos about rolling. I've gone to the rolling competition in Greenland many times. I've gone to many other rolling competitions in other places. I've judged at rolling competitions in Greenland and other places. I have done previous podcast episodes about rolling. So in some sense, I'm thinking, what else is there to say? I've also done rolling demonstrations for, I don't know, that's at 20 years or so now. But in the context of audio alone, I can't show you anything visually. But it occurs to me that you can always analyze something a little bit further get a little bit more detail, look at things in a different way. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do this episode. In July of 1927, a guy claimed to be the first European to figure out how to roll a kayak. And his name was Edi Hans Pawlata. And this took place in Germany. And shortly thereafter, he wrote a little pamphlet, a booklet, describing how to roll a kayak, as well as his thoughts and feelings about the rolling in general. I suppose the fact that he wrote a book about it does give him a place in history, but it is somewhat annoying how the European gets his name there, and whatever Inuit way before him who actually was instrumental in getting the roll to work we've lost who that is. I'll come back to that topic, but for now we will note that the Inuits were rolling long before Edi Pawlata ever showed up on the scene. Well, Edi's book was written in German, and we had that translated as part of Kayak USA's efforts in the Qajaq Journal, which is more of a scholarly publication aside from the Masik newsletter. Qajaq Journal, this is volume number 4, which came out in 2009. And the entire text of Edi Pawlata's book has been translated into English. Well, in the text, he rambles around a bit from subject to subject, and he's got some ideas about the development of the kayak across the Arctic that are clearly incorrect. He talks about swimming as an ability to be comfortable in the water if you're going to learn how to roll, and mentions more than once that the Inuits did not know how to swim, which, as we have seen in episode 44 of the Dubcast, is entirely false. Maybe Edi Pawlata is the source of that myth, or maybe he just helped spread it. On the positive side, he does note in about the third or fourth paragraph that a kayak doesn't really come into its own until you can roll. That's part of the whole design of the kayak, to get the full benefit out of it. And I would agree with that. He also includes plans for building a folding kayak. Now, this is 1920s, is before fiberglass, and before plastic, of course, and even aluminum wasn't really easy to come by then. So it's a wooden frame, and he's using dowels for the long sections. Then you take sailcloth and sew the skin on. But I want to focus on his instructions for how to accomplish a roll and his teaching techniques. And he has quite a unique way to do this, which is very different from what we're doing nowadays. He starts off with an exercise to get people comfortable holding their breath and going underwater. And he says that even some people who swim a lot aren't used to getting underwater for a longer period of time than just a half a second or so. So he suggests you have your students retrieve things that you put into the bottom, say. So he's got, say, coins are easy to see. So you throw a bunch of coins down the bottom of a pool, and you tell people they have to go down there and get the coins, and then this means they have to open their eyes. Well, I've never used that idea, and I don't know anybody who has, but I suppose there are some students that might benefit. Others, it would just add extra time to the lesson. Second exercise from Mr. Pawlata. He wants you to swim on your back and then slowly let yourself go underwater so that the water goes up your nose. And this is designed to get you accustomed to having water run up your nose. Now again, I've never used that technique, and I don't know anybody who has. We, these days, just put on nose plugs. And that way the whole water up the nose issue can be dealt with after you learn how to roll. Now, a quote here from the book says, "After a while, not only do you get used to this feeling of water flooding into your nose, you can actually find it a pleasant sensation, as I have. The reader may think what he wishes about this, but I recommend the following. When I wash every day, I often make it a practice to dunk my face in the water and draw water up into my nose, and while doing so, I think of the thrill of being in an upturned kayak. This exercise offers a vivid reminder of its appeal. And then in the last part of this exercise section, he wants you to practice doing headstands in the water, where you stick your feet out with your hands on the bottom, just to get fully comfortable with being upside down and water going up your nose, I suppose. As you can see, this guy had some different ideas about how to learn rolling. His next unique idea is to get a log that's about 3 meters in length and 30 centimeters in diameter. That's 10 feet by 1 foot. That floats. And this is going to be your rolling aid. He wants you to straddle it and wrap your feet around underneath, and then capsize to the side till you're just floating on the surface of the water. And he wants you to do this with the paddle extended, so it's a Euro paddle he's using. So one hand is on the end of the blade and the other hand's about midway in the shaft. Then he says, bring the paddle at right angles to the log and force the blade straight down and back. He goes into some detail about the exact angle of the blade. And he says that the righting maneuver begins with a deep forward bend. You must maintain this forward and tucked position until you regain your balance in the upright position. But when you get this working, then you go towards the full 360 revolution, still on the log. And then when that gets smoother, you transfer this to being in an actual kayak and doing it. He's describing here a storm roll. A storm roll, which is a forward-ending roll, done with an extended Euro paddle. And he talks about using a throwing stick and then hand rolls for the advanced stuff. So summarizing his method, getting comfortable in the water is done with exercises like retrieving coins on the bottom when you're swimming, and then getting used to water going up your nose, and then getting a log to practice on that floats. And when you get that worked out, you move that into a kayak, and this is a extended paddle forward-ending roll. Now these days, when we teach rolling, we almost always start with layback rolls. Those are generally considered the easiest to learn first, where your end position, you're laying all the way on the back deck. Now, this forward-ending roll that he describes is a storm roll. You're tucked forward, as he says. You stay tucked forward right to the end of the roll. So the question occurs to me, why is he going to teach the generally considered more difficult forward-ending roll as a first roll? And I suppose the probable answer is that he didn't know about layback rolls. Now, you remember in episode 51, I mentioned Ken Taylor, who had Emanuel Corneliuson build him a kayak in 1959. And I talked to Ken one time at Delmarva before he passed away about that 1959, the year he spent in Greenland. And he was keen on watching, what he could learn there. And he made notes of all the rolls that he saw people do. And he described them to me. And he noticed that every roll that they were doing up there when he watched was a forward-ending roll. They didn't do any layback rolls. And this was up in Isloosuit in the Disco Bay area. And another thing I'll note is that in Maligak's video done with John Heath in 1999, there's a scene in there where they put him in a rec boat, a short, wide recreational kayak, and so he tries to roll it. And he does roll it quite easily, but he uses a storm roll, which that's like his go-to roll for a new situation, the dependable thing, a forward-ending storm roll. And in my own experience, if I'm in an unusual kayak, it just feels better to do a storm roll first. And there's another factor that I may have mentioned before, that when you finish a layback roll in very cold water, Laying on the back deck, that cold, icy water is pooling in your eyes, with your eyes closed, just on top of your face. And you want to get that off, so you sit up quickly to let it drain off your face. In a forward-ending roll, the water drains off as soon as you come up out of the surface. And one other factor involves feeling stiff and chilly and cold. If you're in that state, you want to sort of scrunch forward and hunch down in a forward-ending position. Opening for a layback roll, arching your back and leaning way back, that very open position. If you're really chilly and cold and feeling stiff, that's harder to do. So in cold situation, that storm roll comes into its own much better. So I think if they did any layback rolls, Ken Taylor just didn't see them, or they didn't bother with those as much. They weren't as popular where he was. Now, Edi Pawlata did write his book many decades before 1959, but could be the same situation. The popularity of the forward-ending rolls put those to the forefront, and that's what he knew about, so that's what he tried to figure out. The most significant thing I find in reading Edi Pawlata's method for teaching a roll is what he does not include. Nowhere in the entire text does he talk about hip snap. Nothing about lifting your knees, nothing about turning your hips, moving the bottom half of your body in relation to the top half of your body. It's not there. That means that he didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't consciously aware of how his hips were moving. Now, he had to move his hips somewhat in order to get the roll to work. He just didn't realize what was going on there. These days, anybody teaching a roll, you start with hips, or at some point you definitely emphasize you got to move your hips to turn the kayak in relation to the top of your body. But Edi Pawlata never quite figured this out. So the roll you develop relies much more on strength than flexibility and finesse. He mentions some of the students he has, and they all seem to be men. I don't know if women ever picked up on this back then, but nowadays I find it easier teaching women because they can understand finesse and flexibility far more than the guys. We all just want to muscle our way through it. So if you don't realize that you're using your hips, you focus on, when you're teaching somebody, the arms and the hand positions and blade and things like that. It's easy as an instructor to focus on those things because you can see them. In my original Greenland Rolling with Dubside video, the forward progression starts with a chest scull. We're facing down, sculling in the water, and then that, I think, works into a reverse sweep roll, Kingumut na Tishlugu. And from there, I get to the storm roll. Subsequent to that video, I started using what I call the Sherry and Turner progression, which I got from Sherry Perry and Turner Wilson, where you put a paddle across the deck of the kayak, have somebody hold it there, and then you go over on the short side and reach up and grab the paddle and then pull yourself up while you're leaning forward. And that gets your body used to the whole forward-ending orientation. But I still seem to have fallen into the Edi Pawlata progression of starting with the arms and hands and then working your way down. Nowadays, a lot of instructors are using the land exercises ahead of time. If you've got students for more than a day, you take them in a group, and the night before you have, as Sherry does, a whole progression of exercises on the floor to get your body used to the position before you get in the kayak. And where I've taught often, I don't have that luxury of multiple days, so I have to just get them in the kayak right away and start that way. But I will note there's a Tim Galloway's progression I find very effective. He focuses initially, the first thing you're looking at is the spine. What is your spine doing? And for a forward-ending roll, you're going to arch your back first. Put your head up high, arching your back. And then at the end of the roll, you're going to be curling forward with the cat-cow kind of flexibility thing, the spine in the other direction. And you'll take your head out to the side and bring it forward onto the front deck. But that spine thing is happening while you do that. If you really get that worked out, once you get in the kayak and get your hands on the paddle, things get much smoother. Whereas if you start with the paddle and hand positions of things, and you might not even think about the spine like Edi Pawlata's doing, and it could take you a lot longer to get a roll to work. But the spine and hips are key. Edi Pawlata's progression also, he doesn't say a word about stretching or flexibility, since it's a muscle thing. But as I've described in a past Dubcast, how yoga is the key to all the advanced rolling, and I still think that's very true. Now, for the forward-ending roll like Edi Pawlata's doing, you don't need the arching the back flexibility, but the hamstring flexibility allows you to get your torso down onto the deck, as he makes a big point of for a forward-ending roll. So he doesn't have any stretching exercises to develop that, but I suppose that came later in the development of the state of the art. But all this stuff is by way of reinventing the wheel, because the Inuits did this more than 100 years ago. We just don't have the documentation of that. And it leads to some speculation, like how did rolling actually get invented? What was this one person, or how? And so just thinking about it myself, I would imagine that in the way that you have like skateboard tricks developed by somebody challenging somebody to do something that they can't do, and they build it from there. So in a kayak, I mean, initially you'd make a wide, stable vessel to float with, and then realizing that it's faster if you make it narrower, and then you have to worry about falling in. So the bracing, I would imagine, was first done. You slap the paddle in the water to keep yourself upright. And over time, it's easy to think that somebody just challenging, how I can brace better than you can. I can lean more over to the side than you can. I can get my almost tip over and then brace myself back up. And then the next thing would be I can actually get down halfway into the water and then brace myself back up. And naturally, the design of the kayaks would be influenced by these tricks and a waterproof spray skirt or tuilik. But eventually, somebody would actually lay right down into the water on the side, getting that 180-degree thing going on. And enough people tried that, somebody figured out maybe they could go all the way around in a 360-degree orientation, and then there you go. Now, since the Inuit culture was an oral tradition, not a written language initially, any record of the inventors or the early developers of rolling would not be found written down. It would be in the folklores and the tales they told. And I'm not aware of any so far, but maybe in some of those stories there's some evidence of how rolling came about. We'll see. And finally, in Edi Pawlata's little booklet, he makes two predictions. In the first, he says, the ability to recover from capsize is without a doubt the real basis of kayak sport. Oddly enough, little appreciation seems to be given to this fact. People are now avidly practicing the maneuver on its own, leading me to believe that kayak rolling will end up as a separate discipline, something like ski jumping, high jumping, and figure skating. Well, that has somewhat come to be true. It's not as widely practiced a sport as ski jumping and figure skating, but it is a separate discipline. In the Greenland Championships and in other places, we've taken to rolling as a sport in itself. At the very end of Pawlata's book, he's describing a kayak you can build, and he's talking about making your own aquilisock, spray skirt, and a tuilik. And then the final paragraph, he says, of course, in the case of the tuilik, the kayak jacket that is waterproof right up over the head, I have made a number of them using a variety of materials, cloth, leather, and rubber sheeting. But in every case, I felt uncomfortable with the tightness around my head. As wonderful as it is to get only your face wet if you capsize, allowing you to withstand even the coldest water temperature, this problem will in all probability keep the tuilik from becoming popular. Well, I don't think that has entirely panned out. I think it has become somewhat popular, And if Eddie couldn't get used to the tightness around his head, a lot of us have been able to do that. The Brooks neoprene tunic, which has been made for many years, was originally designed as per Greenland specifications. And it came about, I think this was in the mid-90s. The Greenlanders, they have to use sealskin for the competition. But the sealskin tunic being very expensive and time-consuming and a lot of high maintenance, they prefer not to wear them out. So they wanted something made out of neoprene that they could use to practice with. And they contacted, through some intermediaries, the Brooks Company in Canada, and gave their specifications. Here's what we would like. Can you make this out of neoprene? So Brooks decided to take it on as a specialty item, figuring, well, we're never going to sell that many of these, but we can make this custom order kind of thing. And they made a set of them. And I suppose they had no idea that they would be still selling these decades later, and it'd still be quite a popular item. Popular to the extent that other companies have made similar items over the years. So I think Eddie's idea did not pan out. They have become somewhat popular. Well, if you'd like to read the entire text of Edi Pawlata's booklet, you want to go to the Qajaq Journal, Volume 4. And this is edited by Vernon Doucette. And the translation from German was done by Roger McGregor. In 2008, I was in Greenland, the competition in Qajaq in South Greenland, and met a woman named Nive Nielsen. And she, about a year or two after that, released a CD. I didn't know she was a musician. And so I bought a copy of the CD when it came out. And this is, I have to say, this is not slick commercial sounding stuff. This is rather offbeat, quirky kind of music. And even the illustrations are kind of crude drawings here and there. But she seems to have at least one good connection into the whole music world. She has, I think her boyfriend is the keyboard player for Chili Friday, which had a big influence in music of that time period. And Chili Friday leans more towards heavy metal, but Nive's stuff, it's just it's hard to describe. They're quirky, kind of offbeat, weird songs. She's got song titles such as My Coffee Boy or Vacuum Cleaner Killer. There's one called Auto Harps. And just the instrumentation on this thing. She has it looks like a ukulele, but it's got 6 strings on it. So it's like a miniature guitar. And then on this CD, she has people playing, there's guitar, bass, drums, as well as, let's see, we got piano, banjo, horns, saw, a musical saw, reeds, like clarinets and things, lap steel. She has all this other weird stuff just to add to the eclectic nature of the music. And she also has, helping her on this one, is Angu. Remember, a few episodes ago, I played Angu does his stuff in English. Now, Nive can speak Greenlandic, but most of her stuff is in English. A few pieces are in Greenlandic, but the more interesting ones are in English. And so to give you a representation of her stuff, I did one in English, and this one she has Angu. Sings backup on this. He might have helped her write this song. So this is called Good For You, originally done by Nive Nielsen on her first CD.
You've been hiding drinks under your shirt, going round the corners for a puff. Would you show that side to your mom? Would it be good for you? Would it be good for you or anyone else? I'd be damned if you'll ever find me when I went out of my way to hide. You've been breaking hearts and nobody's hurt. Put on secret strings but clever enough. Would you dare to take care of yourself? Would it be good for us? Would it be good for us or anyone else? I'll be damned if I never find you when you go out of your way to hide. I've been faking feelings for your cats, taking time off every other day. Would I fare any less somewhere else? Would it be good for you? Would it be good for you? Would it be good for you? Would it be good for you or anyone else? Would it be good for you? Would it be good for you or anyone else? Would it be good for you? 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 Would it be good for you?
Well, as often as musicians getting some level of success attempt to go for a very slick commercial sound to build their popularity, there are those who do not take that direction. And Nive Nielsen is one of those people. I mean, this is not slick commercial sounding stuff. And yet, she has been very successful. She followed up her first album with a second one, and now she expanded her lineup to call her act Nive and the Deer Children. That's Deer Children. And that CD is called Feet First. And she's toured with that group, and she has, I believe, done some acting in some movie roles. So she has done quite well for herself. Good for her. And both of her CDs, the first one called Nive Sings and the second one is called Feet First, are still available at atlanticmusic.gl. And in keeping with her independent, going her own way kind of streak, not following the mainstream commercialization, she does not rely on the production facilities of Atlantic Music. So none of the Elsner brothers appear with credits or anything on these recordings. And it says recorded in Toy Box Studio in Bristol, England for some tracks, and other tracks recorded in the living room in Montreal, and another track recorded in our attic in Nuuk, Greenland. So yeah, you can kind of tell by the way the sound is. But as I said, she has been successful. Coming up in episode 54, I will look at Greenland in relation to Iceland and how to tell those two places apart, not get them confused, as some people do, which is rather annoying to those of us who know more about them. That'll be next time on the Dubcast with Dubside.